I'm Corey Kerr. Welcome back to Scenes from a Non-Existent Book. All right, future Corey here, having just recorded this. This one's a little bit longer, and if you want to jump to the narration, you can check that out in the show notes. I'm not going to put the text on the screen because that took a little bit longer here. So those are also at coreykerr.com/email. And my Substack email newsletters are in the show notes of that, which will also be in a link in this video. So check those out, and without further ado, you can listen to me say stuff now. This one's going to be probably edited pretty significantly. Right now it's way too much exposition, but if I think too much about this, then it kind of stops. And so I'm going to read what I've got and just know that this is probably way more world building than whatever. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go to coreykerr.com/email. Check out the last post there on Substack, and you'll see that I am iterating out loud on my book. So without further ado, the loop hacking science. The possibility of anyone you know slipping past their death at any moment is terrifying. In normal times, random death was always possible, but it seemed less likely. Heart attacks, strokes, aneurysms, and the like were always a possibility, but they seemed far off, things that happened to other people. And during normal times, or when time functioned normally, there weren't constant reminders of their likelihood. Every time you saw someone distort and vibrate during a slip, you saw a visual reminder that this could be their last second. And yet, people have an incredible ability to normalize whatever we become familiar with, no matter how weird or horrific. And so, as people slipped forward and back, and occasionally slipped too far, the general anxiety of looming death faded and became normalized. You would hope that this would help us become more present and treasure the people in our lives while they're with us. And it probably did for some, but most are just as distracted and absent-minded as we always were. Except for the buddy system. The real danger for people in the middle of their lives was not a slip, but a slip chain. For some reason that no one really knew, people are less likely to slip past their birth or death from their present age, but if they slipped during a slip, there was some kind of force multiplier that made the second or third slip travel much further in time. It was like the slips stacked. In any case, people began to avoid being alone. For whatever reason, again, nobody understands why, no one slips in their sleep. So, it became customary to be around other people when you're awake. That way, if you slipped, someone could jar your system and snap you back to your current age, significantly reducing the chance of chain slipping or slipping during a slip. This habit reduces slip deaths. Well, at least it reduced it for those that had people in their lives willing to do the buddy system. There are a few upsides to time slipping. The biggest upside was temporal oscillation documentation, commonly referred to as loop hacking, because loop hacking sounds better than Todd. This is when information from someone who slips forward in time is used to change the future. People loop hack all kinds of things, from relationships and answers on the test to global pandemics and war. Loop hacking has destroyed the economy of Las Vegas, and marriage rates have plummeted. The scientific community embraced loop hacking as a way of leapfrogging discoveries. Time is a force that wants to be obeyed. Loop hacking is a direct assault on the natural order of things. In scientific discovery, the natural order of things is a lot of wasted time theorizing, testing, and failing. Each time you eliminate an option, you get closer to the solution, but eliminating options is expensive and time-consuming. Edison is often quoted as saying some variation of, "I have never failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that didn't work." Incidentally, he never said this about the invention of the light bulb. What he actually said was never quoted verbatim, as it was riddled with profanity and involved electrocuting small animals in front of journalists. As a side note, I went down a rabbit hole on Thomas Edison electrocuting animals. If you want a rather interesting and very disturbing look into the past, go try to come up with an opinion yourself on whether or not he electrocuted an elephant to death. There was this elephant, Topsy, that actually was fine, but because of a series of events, the elephant was kind of deemed a problem, and so it was marked for death. And anyway, there is a movie by the Edison Movie Company or whatever, film company or whatever, that people would pay like money and do one of those little viewfinder things and watch. of this elephant getting electrocuted. Anyway, it wasn't the elephant's fault. Like, one of the people at the circus, like, burned the trunk of the elephant with like a cigar or a cigarette, and the elephant killed him. And then one of the elephant's trainers got like wasted, drunk, and like rode through town on the elephant. Anyway, so everybody decided that the elephant was the problem. But prior to this, during the current wars, the AC/DC current wars, Edison, to prove that AC was more dangerous than DC, would electrocute small animals in front of journalists. Anyway, weird little point in history. And we don't actually know if he said, I've never failed, I've just found 10,000 ways that it didn't work. But there's a bunch of people around him that years later quoted conversations with him that are similar to that. So, back to the book. The point stands, though. The scientific method is a series of failed experiments until you find the solution. Or sometimes the scientific method is accidentally contaminating a lidless petri dish and discovering penicillin, but it's mostly trial and error. Loop hacking is used to reduce the number of errors by having researchers who slip forward in age tell their coworkers as much as they can about the results of their future research before getting jarred back into their current age or slipping dangerously into a chain. Like most things, this is much more simple in theory than it is in practice. In theory, you'd notice your lab partner has jumped forward as she tells you, Julie, nickel is completely ineffective as a catalyst agent in the gas that you're working on. And Dr. Bakshi's treatment kills type 2 diabetics in human trials. Then you'd punch her in the face and start working on a different catalytic agent now that you've ruled out nickel. In practice, though, the specifics of what we're told tend to slip our minds, while the emotions accompanying those specifics tend to stick. So what loop hackers are often left with is a powerful and vague feeling about something that you can't quite remember the details of. This is fine in a relationship loop hack, where you find out your future husband cheats on you 2 years from now with your sister because the lingering feeling of betrayal is strong enough for you to break things off. In science, though, a general feeling of disappointment isn't specific enough to help you avoid trying to break certain covalent bonds. So, scientists did what scientists do and started taking notes. This should have solved the problem, but their notes started slipping in time and unwriting themselves. Tapes would demagnetize, hard drives would fail, video files would corrupt, mail trucks would veer off cliffs, and there wasn't a single way of recording the information that didn't destroy itself or slip back in time before it was recorded. There wasn't a single way. There was multiple ways, though. The scientific community found that if they recorded the information quickly to multiple sources, some analog, some digital, some organic, that the success rate of loop-hacked information surviving long enough to be useful went up. The cure for a specific type of blindness was discovered 7.5 years earlier than it would have been due to a carrier pigeon, mini disc recorder, yellow post-it note, and a few scribbled words on a coworker's forearm. Here's where I'm trying to decide if I want to have a joke or something about scientists writing on their forearms a lot, and then you can kind of tell scientists because they just have like a sleeve of Sharpie or something, but it didn't fit super well. I might come back and do it later. Gabe watched his lab partner with hidden disdain. He hated people like her. Not Hindus or Sikhs or whatever she was, but dirty loop hackers. He hated everything that she stood for. She was a cheater and she was polluting the future. All these smug ivory tower intellectual elitists felt like they were smarter than God. It was unnatural. Good morning, Dr. Campbell, she said as she put her sack lunch in the mini fridge. Gabe smiles. Good morning, Dr. Bakshi. How was your weekend? He took a subtle breath and focused on wearing a pleasant face as she prattled on about whatever nonsense she had gotten up to this weekend. Gabe had years of training allowing him to be an amenable chameleon. He was interested in what you were interested in, but knew a little less about whatever it was, allowing you to explain it to him. People loved explaining things to Gabe. They liked him more and more each time they got to explain something to him. He was an intelligent and enthusiastic sponge. He flirted just enough to be flattering, but not so much as to be noticeable or off-putting. He blended into the background when his colleagues were focusing. He was reliably competent, but didn't stand out. He was not ugly, but not good looking. He had no distinguishing marks. He was calculatedly average amongst his peers. He hated his peers and often imagined them dying in horrible ways. Dr. Gabe Campbell was a new type of terrorist. He was a future purist. Gabe was raised in a compound in Montana by a group of people who probably would have been white supremacists if time wasn't breaking down. This disturbing phenomenon of the slippery present and ever-changing future presented an opportunity for Gabe's grandfather, who founded the group. The Time Purist started as most of these organizations start, as a way to get girls and make money. He attracted people to his cause by blathering on about a pure timeline and other things that are impossible to prove or refute. Unfortunately, along with the girls and money came a heavy dose of adulation and several pregnancies. This adulation poisoned Aldous Campbell's mind, and he started to believe what he preached. His con became dogma. Each child born and each loner recruited swelled the Time Purist ranks. As the group quietly grew, they gathered several key members that made them incredibly effective. Disaffected CIA agents, some Madison Avenue copywriters, and a school superintendent began a multi-generational campaign to train their children and grandchildren to infiltrate governments, labs, and think tanks at the highest levels. Having enriched themselves on federal grants to develop facial recognition software used in traffic lights to identify drivers, they were very well funded. The software was a sham. It never actually analyzed anybody's face. It merely read the license plate and cross-referenced that with the DMV records. All of this was cobbled together from mostly open-source software and code written by some hackers who were paid in very eventful weekend trips to the Montana compound. So Gabe was raised to excel in higher education and manipulation. He got his PhD legitimately and a key internship illegitimately with a few well-placed campaign donations, all of which was completely legal, but still quite shady. Gabe now found himself a true believer and embedded in a research lab developing chemical compounds with military funding. He didn't actually want to make weapons or watch the nations of the world melt each other, unless that was what was supposed to happen. His devotion was to the pure timeline, an unaltered future, an ideal that was completely illogical if you thought about it too much. Gabe did not think about it too much. His was a campaign of disinformation. He was poisoning the information in the scientific loop hacking community. This was a perfect crime because when people acted on the information that happened in the future changed. There are very few ways to be found out when you lie about something that everyone expects to change after they listen to you. And so, day in and day out, he slipped into the future and reported the opposite of what he saw there. When his colleagues slipped forward, he recorded the opposite of what they said. Sometimes he destroyed their recordings when they weren't looking. His favorite thing was to slip forward in age and remembering a team member making a huge discovery, then reporting it to them that the solution was a dead end. He had actually subverted quite a few discoveries from happening. Gabe felt that his work was keeping the timeline pure. Like most self-assured zealots, he never considered that the timeline he helped bring about was just as altered and dirty as any other timeline. He was involved, and he felt that his involvement kept things right. So, kind of an interesting thing. I've introduced kind of a subplot here that may turn into a main plot of a terrorist organization that is solely using loop hacking as a different disinformation thing. I think I'm going to rewrite it to have less exposition and more of that information come through naturally in the discussion. And obviously, Ask Me Back, she doesn't say anything, and they're supposed to be having a conversation. So anyway, a little bit of a brain dump, but this is one of the ideas that I thought was fun about this book as I was getting to it, is this idea of loop hacking and like leapfrogging past the failures by doing them in the future and then avoiding them in the present so that you didn't have to do them in the future. Kind of just a fun concept on how you could solve lots of problems if you were able to know which roads to avoid going down and wasting your time. So anyway, if you thought this was interesting, like the video, share the Substack. And if you want to make sure that you don't miss out on this type of stuff, go to coreykerr.com/email, subscribe to the Substack email newsletter in which you will get notified of these things. And thanks for sticking around, and go make stuff.